Hello, John Vandervelde here again for my 7th virtual authors event. Today I think we're going to talk about setting, and that is the scenery or the background or the place that the stories take place. There are three very important aspects to any story. There is plot, which is the story itself. There is the characters that move and breathe and live within the plot. And there is the place where they exist, the setting. And it's important to choose a setting that fits the story. I believe that the setting itself becomes like an additional character in a story. It moves and breathes and is in the background of every scene, every chapter. It affects the plot, how the plot takes place, where the plot takes place, what difficulties can stand physically in the plot playing out. It shapes the characters as they have to deal with the situation they find themselves. Not only the plot, but the place, the kind of houses they live in, the weather they face, and all these things. Now, in Misty Creek and the following book, Elizabeth's Journey, they take place in western Kansas, in an imaginary place. Now, I chose the prairie for its starkness, the vastness, and when I worked with the character, the very differentness it was, or how differently it was, from the place that my main character, Elizabeth, had lived before. To me, it was important to have a place like that. I have never set foot on Kansas soil, never once. I have never wandered the wide open spaces of the prairie or the Great Plains. But I have grown up with Little House on the Prairie and westerns and all the rest, and the image I paint of Elizabeth's surroundings may not be accurate, and I hope you will forgive me if they aren't. But the point was, she was in this vast alien place, and that was the point that I wanted to make. The other thing was the time frame, and time frame is part of setting. It would be very different if I was speaking about a character living in 1960s Kansas compared to 1890s. Any more than it would be different talking about a character living in northern Indiana in 1860s or 1890s compared to today. So the time frame is part of the setting. It is part of what makes the story. So those that have read Misty Creek and Elizabeth's Journey, so here you can see this copy too, have told me that they feel like they're in the setting, and that makes me extremely pleased and surprised. I do not believe that creating or conveying setting and scenery and such as that is my strongest tool in my writer's work belt. I am pleased when others think that it was passable, acceptable, or whatever. But the setting shapes the story. It shapes this story. Because when I threw Elizabeth into this situation, I really had no idea how this was exactly going to play out. I started with a specific premise, which I've discussed in a video before. Where she's heartbroken, she's running away, basically. But she's running to a place very different than she anticipated. And this made it exciting for a writer because I could throw little nits and wrenches in her gears, shall we say. Well, this isn't what you're used to. This is a one-room house, perhaps. This is living without lumber, as some of the characters live in sod homes. And all these things add to the story. They add little bits and pieces to the plot. So that's a little bit about, setting today. I thought perhaps, since I've got some time left over, that I would read the opening of Elizabeth's journey, the opening few pages, because I haven't done a reading in a while, and I'm hoping, since I've got like about 4 minutes that I might use, that I could read to you out of chapter 1. The sun rose on a bright spring day, but Elizabeth didn't notice. She sat alone in a half-filled rail car as it rumbled and rattled eastward. Trains would take her to Columbus, Ohio. Elizabeth was going home. The voices of those that shared the space scarcely registered above the noise that surrounded her. Having traveled on trains before, she found the swing of the car and the chunk, chunk, chunk of wheels over rails expected sensations. The stale air mixed with cigar smoke from the man 5 rows forward did not trouble her, for her mind was filled with thoughts and memories, expectations unrealized, and disappointments never anticipated. Elizabeth was going home, but had no real idea what her future held. Seeing the others that shared the car, she shook her head at the thought of how so many would leave Thimble this week. Elizabeth wondered if a similar number had rumbled into town at the rail's end the evening before. It seemed people came and people went. But as she considered the tired old men and others in their prime, she knew none were driven by the reasons that propelled her. Alone in her thoughts, Elizabeth considered the reasons she had gone west, the heartbreak that had brought her. The reason for return to Ohio were very different. Or were they? As she looked about the rail car, she wondered how many had come to Kansas only to be driven back in less than a year. Certainly others like she had abandoned something. Leaning into the worn leather that covered her seat, Elizabeth eyed a family seated near the front of the coach. A man, a woman, his wife, she felt certain, and 5 children, all under the age of 12, sat in 3 rows. Had they come to visit some relation, or had they sought a new life, like she had, only to surrender and return to some sanctuary or other? But Elizabeth had not surrendered. No, she had made the choice to return to Ohio with no plans of returning. Even though members of the school board begged her to return in September, she could not. Only Reverend Benjamin Smith knew the real reason for her departure, a very private reason. Elizabeth drew a breath as she shook her head to herself. Pardon me. She considered those reasons noble in the least, a choice that was best. Love sent her west, and love found chased her back east. And the sacrifice love demanded meant that a new life in Misty Creek would not be hers, could not be hers. Now that's the opening page and a half of Elizabeth's Journey, the second book in the Misty Creek Saga. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed our time together. And I know I'm not doing these often enough. There are things between my time being quite taken at this point in my life and internet quantity of data that stand in the way. But perhaps I can find another way to reach out to you. I hope that you are well and continue to be so. And I'm asking that God bless you today and in the future. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you later.